Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the program where we take films and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the man who uses string cheese to lace up his sneakers, Mr. Ryan Seybold.
Ooh, what's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy?
Not bad, man. Not bad. But we're not here to discuss alternate uses for string cheese. No, we are here to discuss a movie, the last in our sci-fi anime series. Ryan, do you have a description for us, sir?
That's right, Jason. Today's film wraps up our mini-series on classic anime with 1995 cyberpunk classic Ghost in the Shell. The film explores the futuristic blurred lines between man and machine in a world where human body parts, even the brain, can be replaced by cybernetic enhancements. We follow Major Motoko, a cyborg enforcer for Japanese government agency Sector 9, as they are pursuing a mysterious hacker known as the Puppet Master. The hacker is seemingly able to access enhanced minds as a sentient spyware of sorts, and is using government officials to do their bidding. The hunt is on as Major Motoko and her team of human and cyborg alike pull back the veil of technological espionage, all wrapped up in some major action set pieces, as well as a fair amount of existential questions about what it means to be human. The film was directed by Mamoru Oshii and is based on the manga series by Masamune Shirow that ran from 1989 to 1991. The film cost roughly $3 million to make and brought in a worldwide box office of around $1 million, though it did do huge numbers once it hit the home video market and spawned an entire franchise, including sequels, spin-offs, and video games, as well as influencing mainstream Hollywood with films like The Matrix, and even its own live-action $110 million adaptation starring ScarJo. This is heralded as one of the greatest anime films of all time, so I am cyber pumped to ask you, what did you think about this movie, Jason?
Nicely done, sir. Nicely done. As always, going to be happy to tell you right here with my opening statement. Now, Ghost in the Shell takes all the best aspects of cyberpunk-influenced sci-fi and tactical espionage thrillers,
Okay.
and distills them into like one brief, effective vehicle. It's a film that has the confidence to tackle the heady issues of what makes someone human and the relationship of consciousness to reality and personhood, while at the same time being content to put like a lot of weight on the strength of these examinations, perhaps at the expense of a handful of story beats and some character development. The influence of this film is all over the pop culture map, though, from hugely successful science fiction films like Avatar and The Matrix to equally successful video game franchises like Metal Gear Solid. And it's a lot of fun to just watch this film and see where those ideas originated from. Now, I have to admit that I did find the film just a bit lacking when all was said and done, simply because the story felt so brief. And there are a number of characters that were introduced that kind of felt underexplored, chief among them being the guy Tagusa, I believe is how you say his name.
Okay.
I thought he was kind of like an interesting sort of warm and humanistic counter. He's like the cop, or the guy that was a cop, and he's like a family man, and they brought him onto the team.
Yep.
And I thought he was sort of like a nice counter in demeanor to the sort of relative coldness of our android protagonist, Kusanagi. Like, she's appropriate coldness. She's an android. She's supposed to be. But it was just a nice sort of counter and contrast to that. But regardless, Ryan, the examination of humanness and consciousness against the backdrop of espionage thriller really, really worked for me. And I loved the time that the film spent discussing the sort of philosophical aspects of the proceedings of the film. How about you, buddy?
Well, Jason, this is where I may rustle some feathers with the viewers here, but out of the 4 films we've watched in this series, this was number 4 by a country mile. Though the film proposes some intriguing concepts over a wonderful futuristic landscape, I found most of it to feel very abbreviated and half-cooked. The pacing felt off, relying on huge exposition dumps to try and fill in the viewer, culminating in the final dump coming from the film's antagonist, who we've known nothing about until the closing shots of the film. The action scenes were so much fun, but I must admit I didn't have a lot of investment in them, as the plot was often shrouded from me until, you guessed it, the next exposition dump to fill me in on the previous 10 minutes. The animation was beautifully drawn and painted, but also just felt lazy, as single frames would just remain on screen with minimal movement for long periods of time, especially considering the last 3 films we've watched that were just absolutely gorgeous. With characters being able to communicate telepathically, you often wouldn't even see their mouths move, just a slow push in on a single static frame. especially compared to wonderfully animated films like Akira and Metropolis that gave us a true 24 frames per second, exacting exquisite detail and motion. This felt so slow and dry. I know this film went on to inspire much of what Western cinema went on to become in the years ahead, but I can't help but think that maybe those films did this better. At only 80 minutes long, this somehow still felt like a huge slog to get through. I felt like Ghost in the Shell works against itself the entire way through, and much like the cybernetic humanoids in the movie, just made me want to remove my ghost from my shell.
Wow, dude, that's crazy. I did not expect that, dude. I thought, because I mean, here's the thing. So first of all, there is one thing that we agree on, which is that of the 4 films in our little mini series here, the previous 3 being Akira and Metropolis and Paprika, this was my least favorite. I'm putting that in air quotes here of those 4, but like I actually still really actually did enjoy this movie. This happens from time to time. Like I honestly expected you to like this movie. Like it's crazy that
Me too.
You had such a strong reaction to it.
I went into this expecting, when we started this series, having already seen Akira and not having seen the other 3, I'd never seen this. Full disclosure, this was my first watch of Ghost in the Shell. Never seen this before.
Same for me as well.
I expected to like this one the best. I thought that Akira might be like number 1 just because of the nostalgia. I already knew that was like baked in that I loved that movie. So that wasn't up for debate. But I thought that this was going to really play into some heady cyberpunk, sci-fi themes, a lot of good action sequences, guns a-blazing. Give me that sweet, sweet anime action that I was craving. That Metropolis had, Paprika had some of it, but they just handled it differently, a little more cartoony, a little more dramatic. Whereas this was, I thought was, right down the line action thriller and science fiction. And
I don't know,
which it was.
Because
but I was not invested in any way in these characters, in the story, in the plot line. I didn't feel like the action sequences moved very much forward for me. They were just giving me that little palate cleanser to then get into some more huge exposition dumps. And it was just slow. It was very plodding. The animation was lazy.
It was a slow film.
Yeah.
But I didn't think it was like slow plotting for me. Like it's a slower film. And it's actually one of the things that I rather liked about the film is that for me, it was that it was sort of confident enough to sit here and go into I thought it did a good job of going into some of those like headier themes. That's probably the thing that I liked the most about the film, because we had talked before when we looked at Metropolis, for example, that it didn't really take enough time to really delve into some of those, again, headier explorations of what it means to be human and consciousness and all of that. And I think that this movie took a lot of those moments and had, even though it was 82, 83 minutes, something like that.
Okay.
Like I agree with you. I would have liked to have seen more meat on that bone. I would have liked for them to have found a way to like put more in there. But within those 82 minutes, I loved that they spent so much time slowing things down and discussing the nature of, again, humanity and consciousness and memory and persistence and all of these different themes that it tackled.
恐れ、不安、孤独、闇。それからもしかしたら希望。
希望？真っ暗な海の中で。
海面へ浮かび上がるとき、今までとは違う自分に。
That didn't really do anything for you, it sounds like?
Not paired with like maybe this would have been a better, maybe I would have enjoyed the manga better, because I do feel like narratively I enjoyed it. Like this wasn't a failure of a film. I just felt like it was so slow because of the animation style. Again, a lot of those slow shots of just a single cell and the camera pushing in with nothing moving, but maybe just a little bit of the hair and some mouth movement. I just felt like, and then the city and the landscapes that were so vibrant in Akira and Metropolis, and even to a lesser degree, Paprika. We didn't get a lot of that in this. I felt like the city was beautiful, but they didn't really showcase it. Again, very static, nothing really vibrant or bombastic about it. It was just kind of bland and in the background, not really brought to life like we've seen in like even cyberpunk or dystopian live action films like, Blade Runner and 2049 and stuff like that, that we've covered here on the show. Yeah, I just felt like it was, and a lot of those story beats that you're talking about that they took time to really delve into were done by way of huge exposition dumps. And then pairing all of that down with the fact that, again, like I said in my opening statement, there was no real clear antagonist other than the puppet master who we knew nothing about until the closing of the film.
Sure.
So I didn't realize that when we got to that moment when she was going to bond with the puppet master and he was really unveiling his whole plan and pulling the curtain back on all these things that were, left obfuscated throughout the whole show. All of a sudden now we're getting down to it. So I'm like, okay, we're going to have a good act 3 and end. And I'm like, whoa, that was it? Like, I had no idea that the movie was over. I was like, this warrants a sequel, which I know there is one. I know there's video games. I know there's manga.
Definitely.
There's all this stuff that really explores this lore and really fleshes a lot of these concepts out more. So maybe I would enjoy this. But if you're asking me to watch this movie in particular and talk about this movie finitely, soup to nuts, start to finish, I have to say it left me wanting.
But let's discuss these like exposition dumps that you're talking about,
Okay.
because I don't know if this is the same moments, but to me, the film is having a discussion. It's sort of it's discussing philosophy with us as the audience. And while there are people that feel that maybe every aspect of what a film has to say should be visually represented.
Okay,
like I can see that and appreciate that, sure. But also, I think that dialogue and the screenplay itself is such a huge part of filmmaking. And so I actually do enjoy films that have a lot of dialogue and discussion, right? Like I talked about how Paprika had like very dense dialogue, and that was kind of surprising about that film. And I enjoyed that. So I think that, again, like to take 3-5 minutes, whatever it is, to discuss these very complex themes, these very heady themes, discuss the nature of, again, consciousness and memory, like when the rival software that's just, revealed to be like the android girl that gets hit on the truck. And then it talks about how, what is it, Project 5120 or 2150, something like that. Mm-hmm. And it talks about how it like gained consciousness at some point. I thought that was incredibly interesting. And it talks about how once it gained sentience, how it then realized that as a sentient being, it lacked what other sentient beings had, which was the desire and ability to reproduce and then the ability to die. And so it then is like focused on achieving that to basically, again, assimilate fully with sentient beings. And like that whole concept, again, is a very interesting concept to consider. And from
it totally
there,
is.
It can even splinter off into like other discussions. So
absolutely,
I really appreciated that the movie took those moments, even if it was, big chunks of dialogue.
Right. And in filmmaking, we're taught show, don't tell. And this movie told and did not do very much showing at all. My problem was not with the concepts. I loved the concepts. Quite the contrary. That's why I felt so frustrated with it, because I felt like there was so much potential. Again, kind of like a reverse Metropolis in the sense that you wished that they took the time to delve into some of those concepts of, financial wealth disparity and some of these things that they were touching on. Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. In Metropolis. And in here, they're commenting on that and really getting into the meat and potatoes of those concepts. But what they're not doing is taking me down to level 1 or level 2 and all the things that Metropolis took us down to show us what those people were going through or experiencing. They didn't show us the journey of Project 2051 or whatever her name was. They didn't, really go to America, or we didn't even see Section 6. There was so much left untold that was just told to us through narrative exposition dumps of slow push on static thing. And even to the point where, again, we're not even going on a journey with these people. It's just literally a static shot in many cases of these characters just, looking stoically at the camera. And then we'll cut away at the reaction shot of like, the government officials looking surprised at Project 2051 and what they're revealing, and then we'll cut back to that. Slow push. And that's when I exacted my plan and escaped and blah, blah, blah. And then the year was 1997, and that's when this happened. And it just kind of was telling me along the way. And it's like, dude, what you're saying is so incredibly dope. Sure would like to see it. Wish this was in the movie. It's not. You're just telling me about it. And even like when she was contemplating her her own humanity and the cybernetic parts and what makes them human when they're on the boat and she's coming back up from diving. She's down there and she's diving and all this cool stuff. And then she gets on the boat and she's talking with Homie about, this journey that they've been on as cyborgs. And, at what point does it stop? Where is the line blurred and all these concepts? But again, just static shot. And I believe at that point, they're even, at times talking to each other telepathically almost, through the interwebs or whatever you want to call it, because they're both robots and they can communicate wirelessly. So they don't even have to move their mouths. So animation-wise, visually, as I'm watching the screen, I'm like, oh gosh, like this film costs like $15 until you get to those action sequences, which were fantastic. When she's chasing the guy through the marketplace and he's got the shroud on.
That was a standout scene.
The film opens with one of those, with her jumping off the roof or whatever after assassinating a government official.
Yeah, the assassination.
Mm-hmm. And she's putting the psychic camouflage on. Did you not, as she's looking at camera and she's pulling the last veil over the thing and they're looking at her and she's falling against the thing, did you not want her to give them the middle finger? I just so wanted her to be like, fuck you, later bitches. She didn't, but I wanted her to.
I mean, she gives it through the eyes. She projects it through the eyes.
Total middle finger
she's got
energy.
disappearing to do, so. But
serving middle finger, as the kids would say, yes.
I really liked the way that the film presented atmosphere and the again, just the overall feeling. Like when you factor in some of these sort of like slower moments, like you're talking about with the diving, which I want to ask you about in a second here. And you just sort of take everything else where it's like it's not afraid to be a slower movie. And so I think because of that as well, the film sort of gives it this like blue, black, and purple sort of color aesthetic. And I really liked that. I really enjoyed that about the film because I felt like it was sort of a cool environment that it sets. Not cool like, hey, cool guy, but just like temperature wise, it's got a cool vibe to it. And so that matches the fact that we have these sort of like subdued characters and these quiet moments, and the soundtrack isn't blasted and necessarily even like featured nearly as strongly as it has been in a lot of the other movies that we've been looking at as part of this series. It's very subtle when it is utilized. Like it's not a lot of bombastic instruments or sounds or anything like that. So it kind of just lends itself to this overall sort of subdued vibe. And that really worked for me.
Let me be very clear. I don't want to come across as stating that I don't like the slow moments. I don't like being heady about it or like, really contemplating some of these things. I just wish the characters had more to do in those moments. Whether they're, I don't know, like they're just sitting there. Like there's nothing happening on screen. They're again, in many cases, just single panels. Without any motion or animation. You're not really giving me a lot to dive into visually as we're exploring some of these things. Even if, like, let's say as she's contemplating the trappings of being a cybernetic being versus being a human and what line does that cross? Because they're even creating the human brain at this point. So that was all very interesting to me, and I don't mind that. But I felt like anytime we were moving the story forward in any way, shape, or form, or getting to know any of these characters, it was by way of a huge just chunk of narrative voiceover. Furthermore, they didn't really let me experience a lot of her shortcomings. So in that boat scene, we got a lot of the moral reckonings that she was dealing with as far as being a cybernetic being and what it means to be human and so forth, and her wrestling with all of that, which is why she was going diving. It was like the one time she felt something, more or less, is what my takeaway was. But we never really saw her wrestling with that through the rest of the film. Like, there was that moment when she was on the boat and she was kind of like taking it all in around the city, but that didn't really showcase her moral quandary. It just showed her being kind of thoughtful and just kind of, being wistful about it all. But we didn't really gather anything from that scene. I didn't gather anything from that scene personally, as far as what it means to be a robot or what have you. And we've seen this in other films. I feel like, this is something that's been explored throughout cinema history. Like I said, all the way down to Blade Runner back in, 82 or whatever it was, with the cybernetic beings and all of that. We get Rutger Hauer's monologue in the rain, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so I actually really love the boat moment, or specifically the diving moment right before the boat. Let's say, because
Sure.
like I think there's kind of like a flashback as the two of them are on the boat, and she sort of hears her own voice. But like right before that, there's this scene where she's just sort of like diving, as sort of like just taking a moment to herself. And I really liked this because the way that it was presented was she would like dive down, deep into the water, straight down. And then she would allow herself to float up. And then as she was floating up, she would basically sort of like float up on her back from the bottom of the water and then like rise up out of the water. And the nice thing about that is it was a direct representation of that opening scene where she was created during the credit sequence.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Yeah. And so what I liked about this is, the same way that, humans and animals both have this sort of innate behavior where they tend to recall certain behaviors from when we were like babies, essentially, right? Or toddlers, youth, etc., as like a means of comfort, right? Like with cats, they think that's why cats need, because it's like a comfort thing from when they were like young and used to need for milk and such like that. And so I felt like that was actually a really clever aspect to give this android. That's sort of like a means of comfort for her, would be sort of like reenacting her creation in the depths of the ocean. Like I actually thought that was a really nice touch, and it kind of made me just think about that for a little bit. So,
and what about the boat ride?
What about it specifically?
Like, what was that saying to you in the film?
You're talking about where she's like talking to the other android on the boat, like right after.
I'm sorry. When she's on the boat,
splitting a drink.
I meant more where she's going through the boat and she sees herself like a replicant model through the window.
I see what you're talking about. Yeah,
suggesting anything?
So yeah, I do. Yeah. So I actually really appreciated that as well, because I think that it's funny, because I think this is actually one of the instances where the film is actually showing us and not telling us.
Okay.
And to me, I think what's going on is that the film is showing us that, like, she's an android. She's not a unique creation. They can just keep cranking out these androids. And I think that, in fact, that's what they have done. I don't think she's the only one of her kind. I think that her going through on that boat and seeing herself is basically her acknowledging to a certain degree that that's a duplicate, a double of her, because she ultimately knows she's an android. But it's also this thing where you get the sense that as androids, they don't necessarily like to acknowledge that they are robots, or like they want personhood. They want to think of themselves as individuals. They want to think of themselves as human. And so I think that, again, that's us showing her sort of wrestling with seeing and knowing logically that she's ultimately a robot, and yet feeling, to her core that she is unique and has personhood.
Sure.
And so I liked the way that was explored.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, we do get that in the closing exposition dump by our antagonist, the puppet master, as they're merging together and he's kind of unveiling his whole thing. He does explain that with that, he's immortal. Like, he is all knowing, he could do anything he wants, but what he is lacking is a sense of mortality. He wants to be able to die. He wants to be able to have offspring and reproduce and have the human experience. That kind of did explain those moments, but again, taking it back again, like, that was one of my issues I took narratively with the film, was that I feel like the film was always working in rears, as we call it in the real estate world, where we would get these concepts teed up, and then 5-10 minutes later, through one of those expedition dumps, it would explain it, and then we would get more concepts teed up and then explain it. So I'm always like, in those cooler moments when I wish I knew what was going on, because they're not showing, they're telling, I have to wait for them to tell me, kind of explain that to me a little bit. So maybe I would enjoy a second viewing better. Like, maybe this is a second viewing film where, now that I've kind of understood a little bit where this film is going and so forth, and some of the concepts ingrained in the movie itself, I could go back and watch it and narratively just pick up on a lot of that. So in those moments, I'd be like, oh, see, this is where she's dwelling on this, or this is where they're questioning that.
Yeah. Let's discuss the city really quick, though, because I kind of was interested by the exploration of the city. It sounds like, based on what you were saying towards the top of the episode, that you kind of didn't necessarily appreciate the way the city was, or rather was not represented And I thought that it was a really interesting angle to take because you're right to a degree. The city is not necessarily a character in the same way that it's a character in Metropolis and Akira, let's say, you know, but at the same time, it is because it exists very much in the shadows. And I think that's ultimately what all of this film is about, is it's exploring the shadows themselves and what exists within the shadows. And so, you know, instead of being this brightly lit up Tokyo where you can see everything and it's got the Blade Runner stuff like Metropolis, like all that's great. Like I love that. And I love anytime, you know, a setting sort of becomes a character, whether it's a book, a movie, etc. That's always, when it's done well, it's always very gratifying. But I also, because we came off of like a few movies that were all using the city as a character, it was very nice to just have this film sort of exist, let it exist within the shadows. And then also, you know, due to the fact that this is a secret organization of tactical espionage, you know, they exist within the shadows themselves. So it would also make sense thematically that we would allow the city to sort of exist in the shadows, because in this world, you know, everything sort of exists in the shadows in their version of this world, you know?
Sure.
But it sounds like it didn't do the same thing for you.
Maybe some of my trouble with this film is what I was expecting out of it. So I'll give it that handicap. I was expecting more of a cyberpunk. What I got, and maybe this distinction is minute, but I would label this as like a techno noir. It felt like way more of a noir film.
I agree, yeah. Even with the shadows that we were just talking about right now, you know, noir explores.
And it's a whodunit.
So
it's a detective piece. It's a whodunit. Yeah. You know, the antagonist lives in the mysteries and the shadows of it all. You don't know what's going on until the very end when it's all revealed. Grand plan, you know, very Sherlock Holmes Moriarty kind of deal where the antagonist is just fucking with our hero the entire time. And then by the end, it's, I got you, and this is my plan. So it was very much in that noir, you know, aesthetic instead of cyberpunk, you know, which we're normally accustomed to, very, you know, hyper-saturated neon and a lot of the things that Akira gave us. I guess what I'm getting to is just that the animation just felt really lazy to me. And that was so disappointing with how vibrant and bombastic the animation was from our last few films. And other animation, other anime genred films that I've seen, like I said, like Perfect Blue or, you know, some other films that we've covered on this show. Grave of the Fireflies, another great example, you know, beautiful film. Where that film just comes to life and they're able to tell this super crazy story throughout, you know, multiple backdrops, very dramatically. But again, Grave of the Fireflies, to the tune of ripping your heart out of your chest, they show, they don't tell, you know? So just my take.
Sure, yeah. All right, so Ryan, you make a lot of fair points, but in defense of the film, I do want to say that even though some of these things do have merit, like, what I really love about this film is, again, just like so many of the ideas and concepts that are put in here are just very interesting, very unique. You know, I love the concept of android assassins. Like that's just automatically going to get me in there. But like even more so, the specificity of the film, like using this idea of like ghost hacked humans, right? Where people's brains are connected to this neural network and they're every bit as capable of being hacked as any other computer system. And it opens up this whole like conceit of cyber terrorism where they implant fake memories into people. And then it asks us to question the nature of reality as it relates to what we recall about our lives and place in the world, because you've got this whole thing about how, you know, the robots you're talking about, like, you know, if I have memories and those memories are true to me, you know, does that make my reality true or false? You know, and then it's asks the same question about a lot of these humans who've had their own memories basically distorted and new memories put in there. So, you know, there's the one guy who was acting as a criminal. And then when he's questioned, he's like, oh, no, I have a wife and kid, but we're separated right now. And they're like, what are you talking about? You live by yourself. You've never had a wife. He's like, yes, I do. Here's this picture of us. And then he looks at it again and it's just a solo picture. And so once again, you know, kind of the way that we looked at Paprika in our last review, there's a lot of sort of asking, you know, what is and isn't reality based on the nature of our own memories and our own interpretation of the world. Is there such thing as objective reality, or is all reality subjective and dependent on our own memories? And so, in some ways, the film directly asks these questions and has that discussion with us by way of dialogue. And then other times the film suggests these things to us by way of plot points or by way of certain scenes, et cetera. So again, even in spite of some of those weaknesses, I feel like those aspects of the film are so strong that they carry me over some of those parts,
So again, just to clarify, I do not think this is a bad movie. I did enjoy it. It was what I would say is that it's a disappointing experience because I loved those concepts. I can't state this enough. Like I just said this, like I really do. I wanted to explore those things visually. I wanted to get into some of the meat of that. And we did a little bit. I'm not saying we didn't. I just felt like there was a lot of missed opportunity to go a little deeper down that rabbit hole, very similar to how you felt about Metropolis, to explore that. This did explore it narratively to a certain degree, just not really visually and didn't really take us those places. Again, a reverse Metropolis, where Metropolis took us those places, but didn't really talk about it much or get into the people's plight or what got them there. This did just the opposite. It talked ad nauseum about all those things and really proposed a lot of very interesting concepts without really taking us there very often or getting into the meat and potatoes of it, rather than just explaining it to us through these narrative dumps. So, just my take. I loved the action pieces. I loved those moments where things were happening. I loved that whole chase sequence of the garbage truck guy and, how the decoy, and then we finally get to him and realize he was being hacked. Quick question about it, though. Was he, the garbage truck guy, was he a human or was he a cyborg? And if he was a human, because it's something I literally was a little blurry on, how did they hack his brain? Was his brain cybernetic? Was he one of their brain replacement people? That seemed like it was a very expensive procedure. I didn't know if that was like how he was able to do that as like a garbage truck guy.
Yeah.
And if so, if he was hacked, or able to be hacked as a human or mostly human person, my main question was, why was the puppet master not choosing someone more like that if he had access to like a mortal person's brain? Because he wanted mortality, he wanted reproduction, he wanted to have the human experience and escape his cyber constraints. But yet he chose a cybernetic being in the end to merge with. And that was something that kind of eluded me. Did you get anything from that?
So basically, and specifically in response to your question, it wasn't that he chose to be that. It was that he was caught up in essentially a trap that Section 6 had set up for him. So if you recall, you know how like Section 6 shows up to Section 9 after the Project 2150 is hit by the van. Correct. And then, Section 9 takes and Section 6 shows up. It's because Section 6 put into motion a trap. And so what they did is like, and I forget the exact specifics of it, but like the overall high point of it is that Section 6 set up this android, this blonde girl that ended up getting hit by the van that Section 9 acquires, as a trap. Like it did some things to basically lure the puppet master who was going through this neural network and going into like different bodies. It basically set up a fake trap body for it. And then the puppet master took the bait, went into this body, not knowing that it was like basically a robot android. And then when it went in there, they disconnected it from the network, which trapped the puppet master into that body.
Right.
And so at that point, it's stuck there. And it doesn't want to be there anymore. And that's where it talks about how during that whole process, it had achieved sentience. And, that's what leads to its desires, etc. So, so that's sort of like why it like, and then once it's trapped in that body, that's where it's like, hey, what's up, other android? Like, hey, sexy mama, want to kill all humans?
Hey, sexy mama. Want to kill all humans?
It ends up like, hey, let's merge and become like something new. Cause like, I want to be more human and like, you want to be more human or whatever, the exact justifications are. I'm sure that might be a little bit more clear on like a second viewing, but Basically that's what happens is it gets trapped in, it falls for this trap and gets trapped in this body. And then it's like making the best of things moving forward, so to speak. Because
he says in his, the puppet master, meaning in his opening, in his closing monologue, that he's been following her for a long time. Like I've been watching you.
Yes.
This has all been by design. I brought you here, blah, 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 so that we can merge because I need you to, and I want to go live out these dreams of humanity. Okay. And then he reveals that he was the one talking to them on the boat in her voice, that he's like been able to get into her brain and speak to her telepathically and so forth about the glass being, looking through the glass of dirty water and all of this. To kind of like put some of these thoughts and desires into her head and getting her questioning her own shit as well, so that, by the time they come together, she's ready for the merge as well. So he's been kind of laying out the breadcrumbs. But again, if, through that process, he's been able to talk to her, that would also mean that he was the one that hacked the garbage man or some of these other people that have been doing his bidding, like the government workers and all of that. Was that, I guess maybe that was before the trap, before he went into the blonde. So maybe I'm getting my timelines blurry.
Well, no. So also just to be clear, also I have a note here. It's Project 2501 is the exact project is what it's called. So so the Puppet Master is not an actual person, and it's not even an android. The Puppet Master is Project 2501 having achieved sentience. And then because it had achieved sentience, it went rogue and then started like jumping into various people's or various neural networks or whatever. But because it had access to and existed within the neural network, which we actually haven't mentioned before, that, the sort of electronic system that, they use the old, amp plug jacks or whatever that they plug into the back of their necks, that basically allows their consciousness to be uploaded to this neural network of sort. That's essentially like a system of satellites that they can be used to like triangulate locations and track people, et cetera, et cetera. So, but anybody who's tapped into that network, again, just like the same way how like just you being online, you can have all the protections in the world, like the right software can get around that and infect you with a virus. That's kind of what's going on here, right? Is just that, but in this respect, like the virus is a consciousness, which is Project 2501 having achieved sentience. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is kind of proposing what is a soul. I mean, that's kind of what I took away from
exactly.
it. The ghost in the shell is the soul inside all of us, like our shell, skeleton, or a cyborg shell, or whatever you want to call it. It's consciousness. And so he has achieved consciousness. He is a ghost that is now hopping shells. It seemed odd to me that in the end he chose, but maybe to your point, he didn't choose. He had his back against the wall and had to take what he could get. So now he's in a proper meat suit that he can go pilot around until he figures it all out and how to get to the next thing. Hence the sequel. I don't know.
And the other interesting thing too, if you consider this for a second as well, is you could also make the argument that is the closest that he's going to be able to get to reproduction, right? If you look at reproducing as the merging of two separate DNAs, manifesting themselves in a new creation that is a split of both of those, that would be the closest that it could get to that.
I like
that. And that could also be the closest that it could get to death, even though it's really a sort of rebirth rather than a death. But the previous version of both of them is dead because they are now a new version. So in that respect, maybe it's giving him like an ambiguous victory where he does, or it rather does, reproduce and die, only to become something else anew.
See, I like that. Yeah. That's a road I'll go down with you.
Yeah.
That gives me some satisfaction in the conclusion of this film.
Ryan, one thing I've been asking you throughout these entire little miniseries reviews is, did you watch this in US dub or Japanese sub? And I guess in keeping with your very steadfast rule, since this is the first time that you watched it, you watched the Japanese sub, I assume?
I did. And thank God, because I read online the dub is atrocious and they never got back to like
it's so bad.
Redubbing it. Yeah. I heard my take on it was apparently it sounds like one of those AI text reader deals that it just sounds very robotic without any emotion. So,
Dude, did you ever play the original Resident Evil games on like PS1 and PS2?
I did not. No.
Dude, or even just in general, old Capcom voice acting is like known for being absolutely atrocious. Be like, Jill, what did you do?
This is the ultimate life form. Tyrant.
It's like you're trying to be bad somehow or something like that, right?
Sure.
So, funny thing, I actually did something I've never done before, and I might do this again. I don't know why I haven't done this at least once before, but I realized, like, I don't have to watch the entire movie in one or the other. I can actually watch half the movie in US dub and half the film in original Japanese sub, and then I can actually be informed as to both of them, and see how they work. And yeah, I did not end up watching the whole half of the film in the US dub. I started off with the first half in the Japanese sub, switched over to the dub about halfway through. Didn't make it more than 10 or 15 minutes, dude. It's really, really bad. And Japanese sub, definitely the way to go for Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, because, usually the only reason we would do a dub in a situation like this is because we have to take notes and we're looking down and this and that. So, with the sub on this particular film, one of two things was always happening. Either it was an action sequence and there was very little dialogue, so my eyes were glued to the screen and I'm watching all this awesome, cool stuff happening on screen, or we're in one of those exposition dump moments where I'm just, forced to read a bunch, these huge chunks of, exposition and narrative, but nothing was going on the screen. So I wasn't really missing a whole lot. So I'm just like, I'll just read for a little while. So it's like, you talk about a hybrid experience. It's like I kind of got to read a comic book and watch a movie at the same time. Like a little bit of both.
Absolutely. Well, Ryan, with that, we can go ahead and wrap up this discussion of Ghost in the Shell as we do every episode with 3 scenes.
3 scenes.
3 scenes, where Ryan and I point to the 3 scenes that we feel best represent our overall response to the movie being discussed. Ryan, as is tradition, I will let you kick us off with your 3 scenes for Ghost in the Shell.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with the film's opening. From the credits to the opening action set piece of the assassination. This is the film that I thought I was about to see and was excited for. And it, started off with a bang. I was really, really excited for this film. So yeah, that opening little sequence there, from her being created and all the numbers and the green text, which by the way, we didn't even talk about, huge influence on The Matrix. I think I mentioned that up top,
sure.
But with all the opening numbers and the green stuff, I didn't realize how much of a lift that was. And then I watched this, I'm like, oh, they just stole with both hands. Okay, great. And then my second scene is stoic contemplation. This is when Motoko is going around the city all bummed out in her existential glory. That's when I finally kind of checked out mentally. I wish they had been playing Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, or maybe High and Dry by Radiohead. Would have fit really nicely with the vibes there, and at least give me some little jams to bop out to when she was all emo. And then lastly, all of the single cell shots where nothing is happening on screen. This stalled the film out for me so hard. As filmmakers, we are once again told to show, don't tell, and this movie really wanted to tell you all about it and show you as little as possible in these moments specifically. So again, in these moments specifically, don't come at me in the comments. There was, these are specific things.
Come after him in the comments, guys. Let it all out.
I'm going to get lambasted. They're probably not even watching anymore. That's fine. I get it. That's just my take, guys. I'm trying to justify it as best I can, but those are my 3 scenes, Jason. How about you, bud?
Awesome. Absolutely. Yeah. So one of 3 are the same. That's about our average right here. So one of 3 being the same, I'm good with. My first one is, that opening assassination scene. I thought this was a great show of organic world building where it sort of introduces all the elements we're going to see utilized and explored throughout the course of the film. This includes cool stuff that I love, like cybernetic networks and androids and government espionage and future tech and stuff I just can't get enough of. The second scene is the chase and gun battle of the cyber terrorist through the streets.
That was cool.
This was an excellent example of solid action choreography, which, the film doesn't do a ton of these like large, action sequences, but when it does. It's done very well. It sort of uses very traditional action, framing, pacing, choreography, etc. And just the, giving us sort of bit by bit, sort of felt like a John Woo sequence or something. And I thought it was very well done.
I agree.
Appreciated that. And then my third is what I spoke to a little bit before, which was the diving scene with Kusanagi, our main android character. And again, just the whole, I thought it was very sort of resonant and a really interesting way of exploring this whole notion of how an android may seek physical comfort, through reenacting the circumstances of its creation and birth by this, deep dive that it does. I just thought that was, again, a very interesting concept to explore. So definitely sounds like we're going to have a bit of a difference on our formal star rating. So for me, Ghost in the Shell is worthy of 4.25 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed a lot of the heady explorations. I appreciated the slower moments. If anything, it was just over all too briefly. I would have loved to have seen more meat on that bone.
Sure.
But I do understand, too, what you said earlier. There's more content out there that we can go ahead and check out. So I might just have to do that. But how about you, buddy? What's your formal rating?
That other content is called The Matrix. No, I'm giving this one 3 stars. It's a solid film. I think that it warrants a rewatch. This is not flaming hot garbage. This is, there's a lot of stuff here that is for Ryan that I really enjoyed and took away, adding up to a 3-star experience. It's really the disappointment factor. The concepts it proposed, to me, didn't really take the time to explore it. Only an hour and 20 minutes, a lot of static shots, everything that I explained in my review. I just felt like, man, you were so close. Like it's all there in concept. I wanted it. Like, I agree. This should have been a 5-star experience or a 4.5-star experience for me. I just came a little short on the delivery side of it.
Fair enough, man. Yeah, you made a lot of compelling points here. So to everyone watching, if you enjoyed this review of Ghost in the Shell, we invite you to like and subscribe to our videos and channel. Now, this is the final episode of our sci-fi anime miniseries. We spoke about it a little bit throughout the episode. That miniseries includes Akira, Metropolis, and Paprika. Do feel free to check those out. As well, feel free to leave us a comment about what you thought about this movie, Ghost in the Shell, or our specific review of it. We always love to hear from you guys, and those of you that take the time to watch our reviews, we truly do appreciate it. So, for myself, Jason Peters, and my good friend, Ryan Seybold, this has been Esoterica Cinema. Keep on appreciating film, and enjoy the movies.